And speaking of health, we're now going to go to part one of a 5-part interview series that's going to be aired throughout this whole week. It features pharmacist Ben Fuchs, and he's going to be interviewing Dr. Joel Wallach. Both of these men are pioneers in the nutritional health field, and they're going to be talking about a lot of important topics pertaining to our health. So let's go to part one of this dynamic interview.
Hey there, I'm Pharmacist Ben, and I am so proud and honored to be talking to this gentleman sitting by my side here, Dr. Wallach. I've known him for going on 15 years. I got a tape in the mail, like a lot of folks, Dead Doctors Don't Lie, back in the mid-90s, and then I had the incredible opportunity of getting to see Dr. Wallach, and since then, he never ceases to amaze me, and I'm really, really excited to get to not only for me to be getting to talk to him, but also for you guys to get to hear what Dr. Wallach has to say. So with that, Doc Wallach, thank you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you.
Good to see you and good to be here with you. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about how you started. You got a great story about how you started to get involved with nutrition as a farm boy, how you noticed things with the animals, and how you had a personal connection with nutritional supplementation, how it worked out for you.
Well, I'd like to do that, Pharmacist Ben, but I'll tell you what, before we do that, how about you telling us a little bit about Pharmacist Ben?
About Pharmacist Ben? All right, well, Pharmacist Ben started his pharmacy career in 1986, and in pharmacy school, a lot of people don't realize this, but we study a little bit about nutrition, but we study nutrition in terms of how nutrients are medicines, and we study how diseases are deficiency diseases. So this is one of the reasons why I connected with you so well, because this is your message. We're not sick, we're starving. Many of the things that we consider to be diseases, heart disease, diabetes, the things we die from in this country, are really nutritional deficiencies at their core. And what I like to tell people is, at the point of death itself, we don't die of what it says on our death certificate. We die because some tissue system somewhere, some organ system somewhere is not being fed. So we literally die of nutritional deficiencies. And in pharmacy school, I was studying how vitamin A was connected to vitamin A deficiency was connected to night blindness, and vitamin C deficiency is connected to circulatory problems. And on the other hand, I was studying how prescription drugs were toxic and how they had side effects. I remember one time we watched a movie on beta blockers. These are drugs that stop the heart from working in order to lower blood pressure. And this was a movie put out by Ayers for their new drug Indoral, and it was going to revolutionize the hypertension business. And I remember the movie was an hour long, 15 minutes about how revolutionary their drug was, and 45 minutes was some guy reading the side effects of the new drug. 45 minutes, I'm telling you, reading the side effects. So I got the idea that we got a real big problem in this country in terms of healthcare. And the more I studied, the more I got into it, the more I realized that if we could just get nutrients in the hands of people, if we could just get people to start taking nutritional supplementation, we could do a lot of good. So I started practicing in my pharmacy using essential fatty acids to help people with their skin, essential fatty acids to help women with their menstrual cramps, B vitamins to help lower blood pressure, and lo and behold, as I'm sure you know, the results were tremendous. So from the get-go almost, I realized as a young pharmacist that we could be using nutritional supplements instead of using medicines, and we could be helping a heck of a lot more people, and we could be saving a lot of money on top of that. And then when I heard your message, I was all over it. I got that tape in the mail, Dead Doctors Don't Lie, and I was like, who is this guy? And I listened to it, and I listened to it, and I got to tell you, I stole some of your ideas, and I went out and I started talking to folks using some of your ideas. And then one day I was working out in the gym, and I met a guy, and we were talking. I said, you have to hear this tape, Dead Doctors Don't Lie. I said, oh my God, I know Dr. Wallach. And it turns out that this guy knew our mutual friend, Robert Snook. And long story short, he took me to one of your talks. I listened to one of your talks, and I was a believer and a follower. And that's how I got involved with longevity, and that's how I got involved with you. So in any case, now I want to talk about you. And your story is very interesting, how you started with nutritional supplementation. Now, I started, it was already the 1980s. So there were already people who were understanding that vitamin C and the B complex and essential fatty acids and minerals were very important. But when you were working with nutrients, you were talking about the 1940s. Vitamins were only really discovered 20 years before by mainstream science. So for you to get on board, you had to be quite the visionary. I wonder if you could maybe tell the viewers a little bit about how What went through your synapses to make you realize, hey, there's something out there that we could be using to help take care of what people are considering diseases, people are considering genetics, genetic maladies, people are considering birth defects, but really are nothing more than nutritional deficiencies?
Well, it actually started when I was 4 years old. I had a disease that would be called today Tourette syndrome. They didn't have a name for it back then, but it's Tourette syndrome. And I had facial tics, and blink my eyes, and I'd get facial cramps, and it progressed. It got worse every year. By the time I was 9 years old, I'd go into a tetany and fall over, and my friends, my peers, my age group, classmates would say I was possessed, and they could bump me around and give me a bear hug and cause me to go into this tetany. And so I started complaining to my mom, and she took me to an eye doctor for some reason, who's an MD eye doctor, and they examined me and said, can't find anything wrong with him, except he's got very long eyelashes, and they're hitting his glasses, curling back and tickling his eyeballs. That's what's setting this off.
They thought that was what he tried to say, that was causing the tetany.
That's right. And so I'm 9 years old, and I'm not buying it. And I said, no, that can't be my eyelashes tickling my eyeballs. It's too much of a systemic problem. I didn't use the word systemic, but my whole body was affected, so I didn't believe it was just my eyes. So the next morning I went to the library in school, and I went and found a nurse's health handbook and looked for long eyelashes and eyelid twitches and that kind of stuff, and couldn't find anything. So I just went into the index and just started and I got down to cramps. I said, well, maybe it's a cramp, because I was playing sports and at 9 years old, and I said, well, I've heard of leg cramps and things. And so I looked it up in the book, cramps, and it said it was a calcium deficiency. Well, before the bus would pick me up to go to school every morning, I would feed our calves we were going to take to the auction this little bag full of alfalfa pellets, but it had a little analysis tag on it, and I'd read the analysis tag. It talked about protein and fiber and calcium. And so I went home that day after school, ran right to the barn, started eating these calf pellets. Tastes like sawdust, but hey, I had a problem. I was going to get rid of it. Next morning, I threw the Cheerios out to the chickens. I filled that cereal bowl up with the calf pellets, put milk on it. I did that for 3 days. By the third day, it was gone.
Forever.
Forever.
Wow.
And of course, I've been taking the 90 essential nutrients twice a day since I was 9 years old, 64 years.
So what went through your head as a young boy when you're taking these things that are for the calves, and all of a sudden you're this movement disorder that must have been traumatic for you as a kid?
Well,
what went through your head? You thought it was a miracle? Well,
I thought it was one of those eureka moments, because I understood something that doctors didn't. I recognized immediately that doctors didn't know anything about nutrition when I was 9 years old. And I don't know if that was a divine appointment or what, but I do know that I realized then at 9 years of age that doctors really didn't know much about that sort of thing. And I didn't realize that I was going to get into it as a profession, but I knew that I could help myself and I could help my mom and my grandmom and that kind of stuff. And so I began to do more reading on nutrition, and I began to mix chicken food with the calf pellets and dog food, and I was making my own little meatloaf and things. And
as a 9-year-old boy?
As a 9-year-old boy. By the time I was 18, I really had it figured out, and went to agricultural school at the University of Missouri. Halfway through ag school, applied for veterinary school, got accepted, finished my ag degree. 2 years into my veterinary degree, actually found the first case of a mass die-off from pollution, got it written up in international journals and veterinary journals, and that started my path between nutrition and finding a mass die-off from pollution and actually get written it up. It was the first one in America.
Okay, I want to hear about this mass die-off. That sounds interesting.
Well, halfway through ag school, I applied for veterinary school. I was just, as a lark, I figured I'm going to start practicing, so when I graduate ag school, I'll apply and I'll know what I'm doing. Well, because I was working my way through school, feeding the university's beef herd and the dairy herd and milking the cows, the herdsman gave me very good recommendations, and so I got in as a sophomore ag student. They said, well, you really don't have to finish ag school if you don't want to, but I wanted to. So by the time I finished ag school, I'm a sophomore veterinary student, and now I'm a graduate student. Well, that just so happens in 1962, all the professors took off and left the graduate students in charge of all the services. And of course, pathology services, farmers would bring in dead animals, you had to find out what they died from and so on. Or you have to look at biopsies from surgery of small animals. Well, there's one day, this farmer brings in 50 lambs, and he says he had 500 lambs die the night before. I said, anybody else around? He said, no, it's just me. He said, I don't understand it. And so I started doing autopsies on him. As soon as I cut that first lamb open, I knew what it was, because the blood that came out onto the wool looked like chocolate milk, which is methemoglobin. Only it's
methemoglobin.
Methemoglobin.
So it's it's an oxidized hemoglobin, a darkened hemoglobin?
It looks exactly like chocolate milk.
Wow.
Instead of red or purple or black. And it's only caused by one thing, and that is nitrate poisoning. It's the only thing that will cause it. So I knew immediately it was a nitrate poisoning thing. So I said, did you use extra fertilizer in your crops? Or did He said, no, I didn't. I said, well, I need a water sample, and I need some, bring it in tomorrow. And as I'm finishing the autopsies, every one of these lambs, instead of having thyroid glands the size of a lima bean, one lobe on each side, each one the size of a lima bean, each one was the size of a plum. And when you cut through it, instead of being like a beet, you know, firm and crisp, when you cut through it, it was like blackberry jam.
So it's like rotten and decayed.
Yes, yes. And so I knew that these lambs, and every one of them had the same problem. These were 6-month-old lamb. They had 2-inch wool. They were beautiful. I put 10 of them in my freezer and ate them, right? There's nothing wrong with them, except that they had goiter and met hemoglobin. And it turns out that the neighbor had bought some fertilizer, high nitrate fertilizer, to get more corn for his bang for his buck, and it was uphill and rained and got down this guy's well. Well, did all the chemistry on the water, the feed, the lamb's blood and their liver and everything. And what happened was, why did 500 of them die in one night? And so I figured, okay, it has to do with metabolism and temperature and stuff. Well, it was December, and in Missouri, in December, you can have a day like today. It could be 50 degrees in December in Missouri. And it's been like 42, 50, 36, 38. Well, the night they all died, it was 19 degrees. It just dropped to 19 degrees, and they all died of hypothermia.
The metabolism was off.
Their thyroid gland wasn't working, so they couldn't maintain their body temperature. 500 lambs died of hypothermia in one night. Wrote that up, got it published in the National Journal of the American Veterinary Medical Association, and also international journals. And I became instantly known as a student worldwide.
That's awesome. And you're 22 at the time?
22, yeah.
That's awesome. So I think it's really important that people understand that you have a lot of great, incredible wisdom and intuition when it comes to nutrition and chemistry, but it comes from actually working with the tissue hands-on. You actually saw what these nutritional deficiencies do to the tissue, to the organ systems of the body. And I think people need to recognize this is not just theory, and this is not just book learning. This is actually hands-on understanding about what nutrition does to the body in terms of its the body's organ structure and the body's cell structure and the body's tissue structure. That's super important. There's not a lot of people out there who are pathologists or have a pathology background and a nutritional background as well.
And a physician and a veterinarian.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. That's right.
The thing that followed up from that was I was working with Marlon Perkins as a kid during high school, and he got me a job doing
the Wild Kingdom.
Wild Kingdom, Mutual of Omaha, Marlon Perkins, yep. And he got me a job in Africa on the white rhino project, which had to do with saving the white rhinos. It was one of those conservation projects. I was able to get 200 of them, bring them back to the United States, caught them. And so if you see a white rhino in a zoo or a wild animal park, it's either one that I caught or maybe offspring. Well, because of that paper, Perkins, and this was the time when pollution was being brought to the surface by Silent Spring, you know, the movie, Rachel Carson, the book, and so forth. And he was very good. He thought, you know, we have all these animals dying from natural causes in zoos. Maybe pollution has something to do with it. Kind of like the canary in the mine concept, like the old Welsh coal miners. If the gases got in the mine, the canaries would drop off the perch long before the men would die, and they could run out before they blew up.
So extinct animals were like a canary in the coal mine, or animals that were becoming extinct.
Exactly. Yeah. And so he said, we're wasting this material. We need to have, and I know a guy, Wallach, because I'd give him copies of that paper on the lambs.
Oh, wow.
So he pulls me back out of Africa, and he made me the chief pathologist in that project, which combined the services of the Shaw's Botanical Gardens in St. Louis, the zoo, and the biology department of Washington University. And so it was called the Center for the Biology of the Natural System. To make a long story short, over a period of 12 years, I did over 20,000 autopsies, and over 17,500 were on over 454 species of zoo animals, 3,000 human beings who lived in close proximity to the zoo. And the book that came out of it is 1,200 pages. It's in the Smithsonian Institute as a national treasure. Well, they were shipping me all over the place.
Well, what struck you, what hit you the most? 12,000 autopsies, that's a lot of tissue.
20,000.
20,000 autopsies. That's a lot of tissue you're looking at. What struck you the most? What was made the biggest impression on you from looking at all that tissue?
well, pharmacists bend.
Yes.
The most profound finding, and this was sort of in the summary there was like 75 scientific papers that came out, published in international journals. I mean, this was a big project. National Institutes of Health, $25 million, which is a lot of money back then. It was chump change now, but back then it was a lot of money for a 24-year-old kid, right? And so the profound bottom line finding was, and this was published now, every animal and every human being who dies of natural causes dies of a nutritional deficiency disease.
That's awesome.
Pollution was kind of a background thing, and in some cases it contributed to it. And those are another long stories.
But they could have handled the pollution if they were nutritionally solid.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. That's beautiful. So now this is 1962.
1962.
This is 1962. So take us forward, because you didn't start to become well known, and the Dead Doctors Don't Lie didn't hit for another
1993.
Until 1993. So take us forward from 1962 through the 60s. What's going through your head as you're seeing that there's this problem with nutritional deficiencies, and it must have hit you that, hey, we got a big problem here.
We knew it was a big problem, and when I was in Africa for that 2 years working in the White Rhino Project, I was still studying nutrition because I wanted to know what elephants were eating, where they were getting their minerals, where they were getting their vitamins. We were testing water and testing the leaves on the trees and the bark that they were eating and so forth, and writing papers from that too and so forth. And when it came back and began to do these autopsies, they would send me, the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation would send me to different facilities, because some facilities had whales and some didn't, some facilities had walruses and some had gorillas and didn't. And so they wanted me to do autopsies or draw blood samples or whatever I had to do to get as many species involved in this project. Well, they actually, after the time at the St. Louis Zoo, they sent me to the Brookfield Zoo in Chicago because they had whales, and they had the Shedd Aquarium with dolphins, and they had the Brookfield Zoo and the Lincoln Park Zoo, so the number of species went way up. And I was walking into this office, and I'm unpacking, and there's two biologists there who are getting ready to go on an expedition into Alaska to catch some wild Arctic foxes. And I said, oh, that sounds like an interesting project. Why are you doing that? He said, well, we have a pair of Arctic foxes here at the zoo, at the Brookfield Zoo in Chicago, and they must have some terrible gene, because Arctic foxes normally have 10 to 12 kits in their litter, and they were only having 3 to 5 kits, and they're always born with this birth defect, so they have this terrible genetic problem. So we want to get some wild genes and bring that in and reconfigure the genes and so forth. I said, well, tell me about it. They said, well, 5 years earlier, you know, the babies were born with neural tube defects, and 4 years earlier, they were born with no limbs. 3 years earlier, they're born with no diaphragm, so they all suffocated to death.
All different things.
All different things. Every year is a different thing. And then the last year, they had cleft palates. And I said, well, it's not genetic, because it'd be the same birth defect. It'd be like the same birth defect year after year after year.
If it's one gene, it'll be the same problem.
Exactly. He says, what are you feeding them? Ground up horse meat. And I said, well, are you giving them any vitamins, minerals? No, because they're meat eaters. We just give them meat. And so I knew what the problem was right away. So I said, okay, I'll tell you what. Since your guys are leaving this week, why don't you get them off a display? They're imperfect. I played to their beliefs, right? So I said, they're imperfect specimens anyway. Give them to me. Let me kind of work on them and do some tests on them. And they were happy with that. They brought them up there. And when they left, I went to the grocery store and bought some dog food for toy dogs. And I gave it to the foxes. Within a couple of months, they had a normal litter of 12 babies. So I did the thing that a good farmer would do. I inbred them, right? I bred the mother to the sons, the father to the daughters, the brother to the sisters, and by doing that, I had 300 foxes very quickly.
Right.
And then I inbred them, and I inbred them. By the time 3 years went by, I had over a couple of thousand foxes, and they were in the reptile house, the bird house, the administration
Healthy
building.
foxes.
All perfectly healthy,
Yeah.
not a single defect in any of them, because they're all getting dog food, which is perfect.
Well, I think what you're talking about here is so interesting, because this is the middle 60s now we're talking?
This is the early 60s, yeah.
Well, today, the cutting edge in science and in genetics is not genetics at all, it's epigenetics.